All right, taking a look at In Magnificent Style, Pickett's Charge, the Deluxe Edition. This is from Worthington Games. I have to admit I've been fairly impressed with Worthington Games lately. I have recently, not recently, but in terms of all the Worthington Games titles that I have, what you can see here, I've played the Victoria's Cross. I played the old version from Worthington and their new deluxe edition there at the bottom of the stack. And I've also played Chancellorsville. I have yet to play Custer's Last Stand, Shiloh, and Antietam. But I can say that those, in addition to this, in terms of quality of components, have been fantastic. Worthington was really kind of a fairly standard war game publisher prior to these more recent titles. The version of Victoria's Cross that I'd played before, Victoria's Cross 2 there, this was, I've stuck it here with my Victory Games titles because there was exactly this size space left on the shelf, and this is what fit here. I only had one Worthington Games title in one of these old boxes, so that's why it's here. But this was a fairly standard war game from a fairly small publisher, and this was what, 2011? Yeah, so 11 years ago or 10 years ago. Had a cardboard kind of board as opposed to just straight up paper, which most games of this size and this era would have, and had some had decent counters in terms of thickness and stuff like that. So they were kind of standard, though they weren't really blowing me away at the time in terms of components and things like that. But since then, I think most of their titles, and I don't know if all the titles over there, in terms of what I currently have and what Worthington has released in the past 2 or 3 years, I'm not sure if they're all like mounted board type games. Certainly all the ones that I have mounted boards, and this one is no exception. This is a reprint of a Victory Point Games title. So Victory Point Games had been kind of I don't want to say print and play publisher, but they printed, 6 to 10 years ago, printed a lot of like kind of laser cut counters, card stock type maps, very small print and play, not print and play because you're not printing it yourself. Print to order, I guess. It might be closer to what they were, but Victory Point Games, their games were kind of niche titles, and they were not a major publisher. They printed the laser cut counters. They also had, prior to when they started doing the laser cut stuff, they had, like the sort of cheaper, super heavy cardstock counters, and not the typical sort of die cut cardboard counters that most wargame publishers would have had at the time. Basically, what I'm getting at is that the original version of In Magnificent Style was certainly nothing like this, where you had a mounted board, this sort of big, heavy duty, heavy cardstock box. The Victory Point Games titles of the era were either in Ziploc bags or in what I called the slipcover / pizza box style. And I'm thinking, where do I have my Victory Point Games titles? Here we go. Something like, you got Zulus and the Ramparts here, which is an old Victory Point Games title. And this has the slipcover And then there's the interior box, which has, like I said, the sort of pizza box where you pull this, wow, it's stiff, where you pull this up and it opens up like that. This had the laser cut counters, so, you know, fairly nice components at the time, but a much different level of presentation in terms of game. And I'm trying to do this one-handed. There we go. Not really pulling out, but definitely a different type of presentation as opposed to this, you know, or these other titles, which are all similar type boxes. And Victoria Cross 2 here even has a slipcover. None of the other ones do, but Victoria Cross 2 did as part of the Kickstarter. Ended up with a slipcover. So just component-wise, these games are on a different level than what anything that Victory Point Games offered at the time. So for this, you've got the mounted board. You've got nice quality rounded corner, heavy cardboard, punchable counters. You got a glossy rule book, and some of the Worthington Games and Victory Point Worthington Games titles. I know Victoria Cross 2 had 2 copies of the rule book. I want to say Chancellorsville maybe did 2. I'm not sure about Custer's Last Stand, Shiloh, and Antietam, but I know Worthington Games does some cases where they print 2 copies of the rulebook. Since this is a solitaire game, they just printed 1 copy of the rulebook. Might have been nice to have 2, just because the glossy paper is very thin, and, you know, obviously if you get any moisture on it at all, it's just going to crinkle into oblivion or disintegrate entirely. So not a durable rule book, and for a solitaire game, obviously you're flipping through it a lot. But the box, otherwise, very heavy, quality box. And I might set the camera down here and take the lid off the box, because I believe there is some storage. Yeah, there's a plastic tray in here, which is what I thought. It's for the cards. So there is a plastic storage tray in here for the cards and the pieces, etc. Some Ziploc baggies, and there was a little notepad with these record sheets on them, and the record sheets you can use to keep track of your score once you've finished the game. And as you can see here, I've got this board in a finished state, where you can see I was able to capture 4 Union positions, and the others all failed, and only one other actually brigade organization left on the board. That was Kemper's. All the others were over here eliminated, which were Marshall, Davis, Brockenbrough, and Lawrence. And then Pickett and Trimble, the general counters, sitting over here. As you can see, they were both killed during the game. However, they did make it to... Pickett was able to capture... He was with Armistead when this position was captured, and then Trimble was over here with Lane when this position was captured. They both, during the phase, where is it? The follow me phase, they both jumped then back to other units that were still advancing, and at that point they ended up getting killed. So they made it all the way, but then got killed. You can see Pettigrew here. I kept him here. Once he got up here and finished, I don't think he had any units left advancing on the map that he could jump to, as it were. So he just stayed there. So you did get to note him on the record sheet here as alive at the end of the game. And it has this here where you can record whether the generals are dead or alive at the end of the game. As far as I'm aware, this has no effect on victory points. Victory points are solely determined by captured Union positions, the value of Confederate strength points in those captured Union positions, and then whether you have any Confederate units that are still alive adjacent to Union positions. That's the only effect on victory points. It does have here where you can record the number of surviving formations you have and the number of strength value points you have left on surviving brigades. These two things have, as far as I can tell, no effect on your total victory point level or your player performance level. Your player performance is determined solely by the number of Union positions you've actually captured at the end of the game. So the number of surviving units, if you have some units still sitting out here, on the advance position somewhere, as far as I can tell, those have no effect on ultimate victory level. Victory is entirely determined by strength, number of Union positions captured, strength points in those positions, strength points adjacent to those positions, and that's it. The number of, and then finally, for your player performance level, the actual number of positions you've captured. All this stuff about surviving generals or total brigades by points or surviving formations, none of that has any bearing on your overall score here, so I'm not sure why they even bother to record them. In this case, you can see here I captured 4 positions. I ended up with a total of 85 victory points. That was considered a setback in terms of victory level, which was about historic. It was, hey, you shook up the Army of the Potomac quite a bit by capturing some positions. You couldn't hold them. You had to retreat. You ultimately had to leave the field of battle, but your army was not debilitated from this. The Army of the Potomac was not debilitated from this. It's what happened historically. You snuck off and got away, and the Army of the Potomac was so beat up that they didn't really pursue you in any meaningful way. So basically a historic result. And then the player performance level 4, which is fail. If we go over here to the rules booklet, get to the end. Here we go. The player performance level, there's this chart here that basically this is the number of Union positions you've captured. Oh, not fail. Why did I write fail? It's fair. In fact, it is, if you look closely. That's an R, not an L. Because, fail sounded harsh. That's not what I remembered. So fair, while nothing to brag about, you probably could anyway. Which I would think for Pickett's charge, this seems maybe about the same. I think historically, the Confederates broke through, here at the angle. So here, and maybe here. I, potentially broke through at a much different place in the line than the Confederates did historically. But you have to consider that in terms of where the Confederates are starting, which is all along here, historically, they did not do Pickett's charge all in one line like this. They were in 2 lines, and you had essentially Pettigrew and Trimble's divisions marching forward, and then Pickett was behind. And I don't know if it was all Pickett, maybe some of Pettigrew's units as well. There was 2 lines, and this only shows it as 1 line. But historically, there was 2 lines. They moved forward, and here they're all just moving straight, bam, right into where they're going. It's a straight shot. Historically, that's not what happened. and one of the reasons why Pickett's charge was a very difficult and ultimately doomed to fail process, which was that, and I believe it was specifically Pickett's division had to move this way, move this way. They had to do a lot of diagonal, essentially, or not enfilade. I forget what the term is, but had to continually jog over to converge on a single point. So the game is not historically accurate in terms of how the actual historical units moved. Yes, everybody had to make their way to a single unit line, but they were trying to converge on a single point. And this game does not illustrate that, which I'm okay with, because the ultimate resolution of it is that you end up with something like Pickett's charge, which was Confederate units starting at a certain point and needing to reach a certain point, and doing that within a field of battle in which they could sustain significant damage. Like it should not be an easy task, and it is not an easy task to cross this field and take these positions. And if you do, then both certainly skill is a factor, but even more than that, luck is a factor. And that's what this game is. It's really a pressure luck type of game where you are rolling to move each individual brigade forward one square at a time. And each die roll that you make on a 2d6, you're using this matrix to determine it. And generally, you're going to advance. Sometimes you will super advance and get bonuses, and sometimes you will have setbacks and take losses. And so that's the way the matrix is designed. And I have to be honest, when I'm rolling it, it certainly feels like I'm getting this stuff more often than I'm getting this stuff. But it you look at it, it's an even mix of advancing or super advancing or not advancing and taking some hits. But that's what it is. You choose to keep rolling and moving your guys forward, or you decide to stop rolling and move their rally thing up so that if they take a real setback, they don't have to fall way back. They can just stay where they are, according to their rally counter. So the rally counter only moves when you decide to stop moving and regroup with them. And then, their rally counter starts way back here, and then you move them forward a bunch of spaces, and then you say, I'm not going to move them anymore. I'm going to regroup, and then this goes up and joins them. That's a way to keep, if you do advance and roll snake eyes and get the route, you have to fall immediately back to where the rally was. If you moved them all the way up here, but the rally's back here and you roll snake eyes, well, they're effed, and they have to go all the way back, and you're starting over. And you only have 5 turns to get all the way up here and take these Union positions. So it is press your luck, keep pressing your luck. It is not a historical simulation, and the designer, Herman Luttman, makes no bones about that. In the rules, he says, this is not a historical simulation. This is press your luck. It's how much do you want to keep rolling the dice and moving your guys on the assumption that you can keep moving them and not suffer disaster. And I think it's a lot of fun. I think he has sprinkled the game with all of the historical tidbits of Pickett's charge. You've got the historic terrain here. You've got the Bliss Farm. You have the Kadori Farm. You have the Emmitsburg Road, the fences throughout the field, and historically the Emmitsburg Road fence, which was the road itself, and the fence was a major obstacle. And that's displayed by this dotted line all the way across here. which is obstacle terrain. When you have to roll a very specific roll, you have to get one of these good rolls here, or one of these determined advance rolls, to be able to advance into an obstacle or potentially a special card draw to affect that, to get across these points. And so as a result, you could end up here making multiple movement rolls just to try and get into the space. And so in terms of terrain, and it's the same thing, once you finally get to the line, you got to do the same thing. You got to make a come on boys or onto Washington roll here on the matrix, or have a card that allows you to do it, to get into these Union positions to actually do a bayonet combat and see if you can capture those positions. You have to get those special rolls. So the terrain is well represented. The historical situation in terms of fire that they were receiving from the Union positions. You can see here when Confederate troops get in this position at the angle, they take hit penalties. The same way here when they're in these farms, the Bliss farm, they take a hit bonus. The same thing at the Kadori farm, hit bonus, because there's cover there. The fire effects of combat are reflected as you draw cards throughout. You have gray benefits or blue benefits when you draw cards. So if you're drawing, if this says like under heavy fire, you draw a blue card because the unit has taken hits and something advantageous for the Union troops happens. The same way when you get the one of the Come On Boys results, you draw a gray card that helps the Confederates. So you roll well, it helps you. You roll poorly, it helps the Union. So in addition to your unit potentially taking hits, then a card could be drawn that assigns hits somewhere else on the battlefield. It's a very delicate balance of pushing your luck versus taking hits and having cards drawn that impact you negatively and can push your units back, can make them take hits. They ultimately disintegrate and are removed from the board. So you get the gray cards then can help you bring strength points back so you can keep your units going, can help you advance them, can help you advance multiple units at once. There's all kinds of different effects the cards can have. So despite the fact that the mechanism of the game is just really roll your dice and push your luck, or if you roll well, you're good. If you roll poorly, you're effed. In terms of mechanism, there's nothing historical about that. There's then just all the trappings of which units you're moving forward that were there historically, what the terrain that you're moving into is like historically. So there's all that stuff that makes you feel like you're playing a historical game, when in reality the mechanism is not, a simulation in any way. But it's one of those games that does this great job of having this awesome little nuggets of history. You have all these special counters over here. You can have Meade potentially responding. You can have heroic actions for individual units. You can have the old warhorse here, which was Longstreet. You can have his X factor come into play that allows you to negate event cards. You can have, smoke and cover and ground cover. You can have obstacles that pop up in front of them randomly in addition to the actual on-board obstacle stuff. You can have things like what happened here. Wreckage obstacles showed up in this space. So that means if you're here, you got to roll, an advanced movement. You got to get one of the Come On Boys or Determined Advance or onto Washington in order just to even move into this space. So you can have random obstacles show up at different points on the battlefield. So all kinds of little nuggets of, kind of historical adversarial things that happened to the units that were on the board. All this kind of flavor stuff that just does an awesome job of making this feel like you're playing out Pickett's Charge, even though from a simulation aspect, it's clearly not. The units are not how they were lined up, how they were historically. They're not moving how they were historically, but you have enough of this sort of historical veneer, enough historical chrome that you feel like, yeah, this feels like Pickett's Charge. Trying to get your Confederate units across in a grand style, as it says, in magnificent style, to the Union positions to take them in combat and have some kind of chance to do so. And you do. You don't have a great chance to do so, but you have a decent enough chance to where you want to keep trying it to do so. So, I played through the first time. I ended up with 0 points, and it was a disaster. The second time, I was able to capture 4 positions. So, there's enough variability here to make it challenging, and at the same time, not totally frustrating. It can be rewarding. You can end up frustrated, try again, and end up happy. So, it's not one of those things where you have to math it all out in order to have any chance of success. You can kind of throw caution to the wind, take it casual, wing it, and still meet with some success, which I love. I'm not one of the big math brain type gamers. I want to be able to kind of wing it in a game, have a drink, enjoy myself. And this is definitely that type of game. Like, just roll some dice. Some cool shit's going to happen. It doesn't matter. If you haven't planned out every last detail, you can push your luck on it. You can wing it and still have a great, fantastic, fun, and engaging narrative happen. And you can also meet with total disaster. But you're not guaranteed to meet with total disaster if you don't do all the math, the big math brain stuff. So that's the litmus test for a successful game for me. I want to be able to wing it. I want to be able to have had a few drinks when I come down and say, you know what, I want to mess around with this and see what happens on the board, and not have it just be a giant dismal failure because I'm not, burning out the brain cells trying to figure out every last detail. It's not what this is. It's a fun, simple, quick playing, engaging, and enjoyable experience. So I would say if you have the opportunity to get this, if you're on the Kickstarter, great. Probably still available from Worthington Games to purchase retail. I don't know about local retailers or online retailers having it. It's kind of hit or miss with the Worthington Games. Just depends on how big their Kickstarter stock was in terms of how much this will be available at retail. But I can highly recommend it if you're at all interested in Gettysburg. If you're at all interested in Pickett's Charge, yes, not a simulation, but a very engaging, heavily chromed, super narrative, fun, swingy treatment of what Pickett's Charge would have been like, with all the little historical elements that we know and love from this particular aspect of the Gettysburg battle. So I can recommend checking it out. And really, other Worthington games, this is kind of I'm talking up Worthington big here because the 3 titles that I've played now that I own, among the 6 total, the 3 that I've played so far have been fantastic. The reviews that I've seen for Shiloh, Antietam, and Custer's Last Stand have all been good as well. And certainly I can speak to the components of those games, if not the actual gameplay yet. They're all fantastic. Like, Worthington's really, really stepped up their game in terms of components. I have not yet seen a Worthington game that is not fantastic in terms of components. And certainly the ones that I haven't bought that have had Kickstarters and other reviews out there. I know there's one on the Crusades. There's some coming up on various siege battles like Siege of Malta and so forth. There's World War II treatment of Malta. All those Kickstarters and all those recent Worthington titles in the past couple of years all look the same, that have these really nice boxes, really nice rounded corner counters, sometimes multiple copies of the rulebook, nice cardstock, player aids. Here the player aids are actually part of the cardboard counter stuff that the counters punch out of, which is even nicer. And then on the board itself, all the stuff's printed out on the board, which is great. So just component wise, they're fantastic. Narrative and gameplay wise, they've been fantastic. And the 3 games that I played, this one was Herman Luttman, and I'm afraid I don't know the names of the designers on the 2 on Chancellorsville and Victoria Cross 2 that I played so far. I probably mentioned them both in the videos that I've done of those games to this point, so you can check those out and find the specific designer names. But all of the games themselves have been fantastic, and then, which is, up to the designers, and then Worthington as the publisher and developer has really just knocked it out of the park in terms of components. So a fantastic, enjoyable experience in magnificent style from Worthington Games and some of the other Worthington Games titles that I point out over there. I'd also recommend everyone check out, and definitely, even if you don't pull the trigger on their Kickstarters or whatever, just put these guys on a watch list or whatever. Chances are they're going to release something from a theater or an era that you're interested in, and I can guarantee you the component quality is going to be good. The design quality, the development quality is going to be good. They're not going to be riddled with errata. There might be an FAQ, something like that, some explanations of things, but they're not going to be a poor experience. They're not going to be I'm going to wait until a new revised edition of the rules comes out like most wargame publishers. This stuff is pretty solid out of the gate for Worthington. That's been my experience so far, and I have no reason to believe it would be different going forward. So definitely check these out and check out Worthington Games.